So my name's Isaac. I am the founder, president, CEO of Crimson Herring Studios based here in Edmonton. I started the studio back in April of 2020. I had the idea for what is now the video game Sovereign Syndicate, which releases on January 15th for PC. It'll be on Steam and GOG. So Sovereign Syndicate is a Victorian steampunk RPG with tarot cards instead of dice. So very narrative driven, skill checks, inspired by games like Disco Elysium, but even more recently, right, Baldur's Gate 3 and Warhammer 40K Rogue Trader, although we're certainly lighter on the combat, right, more narrative and story driven. But that's essentially the game in a nutshell. The studio, like I say, founded back in 2020. It's my first video game. I wanted to add more games like this to the ecosystem. It's my favorite type of game to play. I didn't think there were enough of them out there, and so I'm a bit of a hobbyist science fiction writer. We wanted to create games that told really interesting stories, and so we took the literary reference of a red herring and we twisted a little bit. So Crimson Herring Studios is kind of where the name comes from. I didn't want to spend too much time thinking of the name of the studio, right? Nobody remembers the name of the studio unless we're Blizzard, BioWare, Activision, something like that, right? People remember the games. They only know the studios if you release a bunch of successful games. So I hope that people do that, but I also didn't want to spend a bunch of time, thinking about the name instead of making a game. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for Shadowrun, which is started as a tabletop RPG and then became a series of video games, which is this like cyberpunk dystopian role-playing game. Disco Elysium being another big inspiration. Really, I was sitting at home during the COVID lockdowns playing a lot of games like this, and just like I say, just wish that there were more of them. I've always really liked steampunk. I'm really inspired by traditional Victorian science fiction. Right, Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, people like that really wrote a grounded science fiction that was based in the Victorian time period. And so it just seemed really natural for me to write in that time period because I just have so much experience with that sort of literature. Yeah, I think, from a role-playing game perspective, I think that the more story-driven, the combat light or games without combat in them that are still RPGs in essence, is a bit of a niche market. Right, Disco Elysium was really the trailblazer in that market of a game that was very successful. That while it has those nuts and bolts of a traditional RPG, it really steers away from combat and tells a more detailed story. And so, right, there have been a few other games like that, but I think that we're on sort of the bleeding edge of that new niche in the RPG market. Obviously using tarot cards instead of dice, right? So many RPGs use a basis of the RPG is the RNG perspective of when I go to do a thing, right? You're playing a tabletop RPG, you roll dice, see what the result is, and that determines, right, things like degree of success or failure. Using tarot cards is different. I liked it from a visual design perspective. The tarot cards just look really sharp, right? The colors are great, that sort of thing. But also, I find it helped us lean into the mysticism and the pseudoscience and stuff of the Victorian era, right? We used phrenology in our character sheets, which is like people, right, the shape of their brains and the shape of their skulls and how exercising different parts of their brain would help that part grow. And so that seemed like a really natural fit for developing your character, especially in a narrative-driven game where right, you're using right narrative and dialogue and decision making like that. And then the tarot cards, right, just part of the mysticism of the era was that sort of right belief in tarot cards and things like that was certainly stronger than it is today. And so we just thought it was a really natural fit into the world that we were trying to make. I guess the importance of funding, right? When we started, I didn't know a lot about the games industry from a business perspective, right? Like I come from a more traditional corporate background, spent a lot of time in accounting and finance and HR, but mostly in oil and gas. So games, right? It's a project-based business, just like oil and gas, just like construction jobs, right? You get funding, you get hired to make a game, which is a project in and of itself. You bring different people on at different stages in the project, you manage it, manage the outcomes, productivity, efficiency, tasks, all that sort of stuff until you at the end have a finished game. It's obviously a more creative product than building a building is. So it's more subjective in a lot of ways. But the importance in the ecosystem around funding and reliability of that funding and things like milestone payments and things like that, just trying to apply all that to the games industry, right? Like I came into this maybe naively, thinking that I would just self-fund it, right? I have some money put away, that'll probably be fine. Turns out not even close. And that without something like the Canada Media Fund, we wouldn't be where we are today, right? We maybe would have released a game, but it wouldn't have been a game of the same quality, the level of content and all that sort of stuff, right? We were talking before the interview started that really, we raised about 1.4 million through the Canada Media Fund. I think our total budget on Sovereign Syndicate is about 2 million. And that puts us in although that's the well-funded indie level studio in video games, right? Think about it like indie films, right? It's very comparable to films, right? In that, people can go and make films for that little amount of money, but there's also $100 million, $200 million blockbusters, and video games are much the same, right? So to think that, well, we got, $1.5 million, that's a ton of money. I mean, it is relatively, but it's not if you're looking at a scope of work and a project that's like Spider-Man 2 or The Last of Us 2, right? Those are $200 million US projects. So putting that in Canadian terms, even more money. So a lot of the inequality in funding, just the ecosystem around funding, obviously interest rates changed quite a bit when we were right from the beginning of COVID lockdowns in April of 2020 to now. Look at what happened to interest rates. And so that affects the entire funding ecosystem of the industry, right? Because publishers are out there borrowing money, VCs are out there borrowing money, government programs are based on the budgets that they have available, and all levels of government are tightening their belts and things like that to combat inflation and stuff like that. And so it even just becomes more difficult to raise money. And so now going into that sort of, environment and ecosystem, it's like, how do we pivot as a studio to adjust who we are, how big we are, and what we're making to now our improved knowledge of what the funding mechanisms and ecosystems are like and how easy or challenging it is to raise money, right? There were certainly times during COVID, particularly around blockchain games and stuff, where it seemed like some studios had a really easy time of finding money to make NFT games because capital was cheap and easily available, and NFTs were this new big thing, right? We might be seeing that now on the AI games where it's generative AI content. Maybe there's money out there for that stuff. So, right, you start asking yourself questions about how much funding do we need? Where can we get that from? And what does that mean in terms of what kinds of games that we can make? And I think that's always changing and we're always learning more about it. But I certainly learned a ton in that area over the last couple of years. I think I'll talk about marketing, right? I don't think enough indie studios focus on marketing and use it as a holistic exercise, right? I think they look at right, we'll make this awesome game and people will just love it and it'll just sell well. But right, as you said, there's more games coming out all the time, right? Something like 13,000 games came out on Steam last year. So 40 games a day, right? Everything from Spider-Man 2 to a student project that somebody made in school in a couple of hours. All that stuff's coming out on Steam all the time. And so right from product design through until post-release, marketing is a constant activity. Right? People like Chris Sikowski will say the most important marketing decision you make is what game to make in the first place, right? What features, what mechanics, what genre, what art style, those decisions in the beginning kind of set the tone for how well your game is going to do, right? Is it the right fit for your audience? Are you on the right platforms? Who are you marketing to? That you have budget for marketing, that you think about marketing as an actual business expense, that you're not just going to create a thing and put it out in the world and hope that it does well, right? And at the same time that marketing is often frustrating, right? We've been talking about this game. I've been thinking about working on and talking about this game now every day for almost 4 years. And that's right. Like our Steam page went public in July of 2021. And now it's January of 2024 and the game is coming out. So that's, 3 years of, 2.5 years of it's in public. People are talking about it. We're marketing it. We've got ads on Facebook, ads on Twitter, ads on Reddit. We're posting on Reddit every month for Indie Sunday. We're applying for every Steam festival that we can. We're sending out press releases every time we have something to say. We've got user feedback all the time. And not everything that we did was successful, and not every post that we make on Twitter gets a lot of attention. But you have to keep at it, right? Like we're at almost 60,000 wish lists on Steam right now, but that's, a few at a time. We had days in there where we had 0. Right? Today we might get 1,000 wish lists because we're close to launch and we're featured on Steam, and right, we're gonna get we've got some good media coverage going into launch and all that stuff. So right now is super exciting, but it's as a result of all the work we did before now to get the feature set right, get the unique selling points right, get the tarot card art right, get the the art style of the game, the mechanics, the marketing messaging, how we show it and talk about it, the demo, right? All the work that all the Steam festivals we've been in, all the ads we put up, all of it is like this cumulative stored energy right now that we hope on Monday just explodes. But you have to do the work of feeding that stored energy, or you don't have any when the game releases and it just kind of flops.